nobleman is attended by servants as he brushes his teeth, his face thickly coated with foundation. The servants groom him, drawing the corners of his mouth higher and higher. What seems like a smile is more like a frozen, lifeless grin. As he finishes dressing in his fine clothes, the butler enters, followed by several servants pushing a massive portrait. The butler tells him this is his mother, who died giving birth to him. Another portrait is brought forward. The man in the painting holds a long sword, his expression stern. The butler explains that his father was a member of parliament. Upon hearing this, the man immediately bows in reverence. Finally, a third portrait appears, his childhood self. He gently traces the beautiful lips in the painting, a smile he has never truly possessed. Now, he is the heir to a marquise. In public, he is showered with endless flattery and admiration, but behind closed doors, he remains a monster, mocked by all. Now, let us step into Victor Hugo's tragic tale, The Man Who Laughs. Gwynplaine, the descendant of a lord, becomes a victim of court intrigue for political reasons. As a child, he is sold to slavers, who cruelly slice his face from the corners of his mouth to his ears. On a stormy night, even the slavers abandon him. In the howling wind and snow, he sees an adult kneeling in the snow, clutching a child. The adult has stopped breathing. Only the child remains alive. He picks up the poor child and knocks on every door in the village. Warm candlelight glows from within, but no one opens for him. Helpless, he carries the child step by step toward the graveyard. Gwynplaine shivers in the cold, wanting to sleep but fearing the child will die with him. At that moment, a light appears. Ursus, a wandering performer, pokes his head out of his caravan. Seeing the child, he first tries to shoo them away, but then takes pity and brings them inside. He dries the little girl's hair, only to realize her eyes are empty. She is blind. Yet, she feels the warmth of Ursus's large hands. Ursus asks the boy his name. When he lifts the oil lamp, Ursus finally sees the boy's grotesque, terrifying face. The grotesque smile made Ursus's heart tremble, not out of fear, but out of pity for the child. Ursus asked who had done this to him, and Gwynplaine whispered the name of the slavers. Beyond these painful memories, Gwynplaine remembered nothing. One was carved into scars by fate. The other groped forward in darkness. These two children, abandoned by fate, appeared in Ursus's world on that snowy night. In that moment, Ursus felt an inexplicable connection. Pity and fear intertwined. This world was never as gentle as it seemed. Ursus held the two pitiful children, a tenderness he had not felt in years, welling up inside him. The three of them, bound together, began their wandering life. A loyal wolf guarded them at all times. By day, Ursus performed on the streets to make a living, selling herbs. He was wounded by strangers' stares and tormented by their mockery. Gwynplaine often wore a thick mask to hide his cruelly disfigured face, yet even then, curious children would pull off his mask. Each time, Ursus would appear in time, shouting and driving them away. Dea would always run over gently to comfort Gwynplaine. "They laugh at you, but I know you are crying." Gwynplaine dared not cry, for if he did, the torn corners of his mouth would ache even more. So he could only keep smiling, even in pain, forcing himself to wear that grin. Ursus carried the weight of the children's safety. His life was heavy with responsibility, yet he never complained. He willingly set aside his own comfort, pouring all his energy and emotion into the two helpless children. One day, a turning point finally arrived. Ursus performed in front of a church, but there was no audience. Gwynplaine, without his mask, began to mimic Ursus's movements. This unexpected act drew many curious onlookers. Ursus lifted Gwynplaine's face. He told the crowd that Gwynplaine had once been possessed by a demon, which was exorcised in an explosion, leaving the smile permanently etched on his face. Then, Ursus claimed Gwynplaine could ward off evil with his gaze, and his hair could banish demons. The crowd eagerly raised their hands, buying locks of Gwynplaine's hair. Days passed, and their business thrived. Every time people saw Gwynplaine's performance, they burst into laughter. They mocked his grotesque face, not his act. Dea played music beside him, dispelling his fear. In their little home, the three could finally eat warm meals, and their beds were no longer cold. The coins in their hands could buy warm blankets and clean clothes. A long-lost sense of security welled up in Ursus's heart. Though their wandering days were not over, at least they no longer had to stay up all night worrying about survival. Dea always stayed close to Gwynplaine. Her fingers clung to his like vines, as if letting go would mean losing herself in this cold, unfamiliar world. Gwynplaine and Ursus were the only sources of warmth Dea could feel in the desolation and cold, her guiding light. By the time Gwynplaine turned 15, they arrived in London. Ursus gazed at the distant, dazzling lights and said, "Our performances have already gained some fame in the villages. Now, we will conquer this city." Street lamps flickered to life and crowds bustled about. In this bustling metropolis, the circus's grand tent stood like a strange maze, as if stepping into another world. The nights were filled with splendor and wonder, where laughter, applause, and music wove together into a lively spectacle. It was as if the entire world had been pulled into this bizarre, mesmerizing circus performance. Each performer had a unique charm. The bearded lady captivated with her blend of strength and tenderness. The dwarf ignited laughter with his liveliness and wit. The clown made people forget their worries with his exaggerated antics. Gwynplaine and Dea, like two small but steadfast stars, performed with a sincerity that, though not as dazzling as others, carried the warmest heart. He stood before the mirror, slowly removing his mask. The reflection showed his face, sliced open by a blade, frozen in a grin. The music softly brushed the rim of a glass, producing a crisp, melodic chord. Dea played the role of a lost princess in the snowstorm, her trembling figure gently lifted by Gwynplaine. This moment melted the coldness in the hearts of the audience. On stage, the two were in perfect harmony, their bond deep and tender. No matter how sorrowful a person was, a glance at the laughing man seemed to scatter all their troubles in the wind. Some even picked up charcoal to sketch Gwynplaine's portrait. Gwynplaine and Dea depended on each other, growing up together. He was her eyes to the world, and she was his warmest harbor. Yet Dea had a foreboding sense of unease. She confessed her fear of losing Gwynplaine in this city. Gwynplaine believed they were like siblings. Some things were never meant to be.
Parce qu'un frère ne doit pas avoir ce genre de pensée pour sa sœur.
Mais nous ne sommes pas frères et sœurs.
He was deeply insecure, afraid his ugliness would push her away. Dea gently removed his mask, her fingers tracing his face. A pure and beautiful first kiss warmed two lonely souls. This smile and determination became their true refuge in the cold wind. The laughing man caused a sensation in London, drawing massive crowds every night. The audience was moved by their genuine emotion, even attracting the attention of a beautiful duchess. She appeared like a goddess, looking down from above. She was deeply drawn to Gwynplaine. The moment their eyes met, Gwynplaine saw a fiery intensity in the duchess's gaze. She was nothing like Dea. Ursus angrily accused Gwynplaine of provoking the countess with such a look. He then warned Gwynplaine to stop kissing Dea during performances. Gwynplaine defended himself, saying he was only following Ursus's script. He admitted he was infuriated by the duchess's haughty, disdainful demeanor. Dea asked Gwynplaine if the duchess must be very beautiful, since he had looked away during their kiss. She even sensed an unfamiliar distraction in him. Gwynplaine evaded her questions, insisting his eyes were only for Dea before walking away. Ursus comforted Dea, reminding her not to depend on Gwynplaine so much. Men are hard to understand, he said, especially when they succeed. Depending on just one person for everything is a very dangerous thing. Gwynplaine stood alone by the sea, letting the wind blow over him, when suddenly a well-dressed valet appeared. The valet told Gwynplaine that the countess wished to see him. Inside the gilded carriage, the duchess's gaze was like a glowing dagger. She leaned in with a smile. "You gave me a thrilling night. You moved me deeply." Gwynplaine knew the royal nobility had always been fascinated by strange faces, but the duchess said, "On the contrary, it is your soul that moves me." She murmured softly, her tone a mix of seduction and command. Overwhelmed by her presence, Gwynplaine hastily fled the carriage. Back in the shabby caravan, soft light fell on Dea's sleeping face. She lay peacefully, a faint smile on her lips. Gwynplaine stood by the bed, unable to resist leaning down to kiss her. Dea whispered, "I am yours." But insecure, Gwynplaine turned and walked away. In the moonlight, Dea gently approached him.
Pardonne-moi, Dea. Je pourrais jamais te rendre heureuse. Je peux pas.
Il n'y a que toi qui puisse me rendre heureuse.
Peut-être pas. Et Sylvain?
J'aime beaucoup Sylvain. Mais si je devais ne plus entendre le son de ta voix, ne plus sentir ta présence, je n'aurais plus aucune raison de vivre.
She never judged Gwynplaine's twisted face with her eyes. Instead, she pieced together his image with her fingertips and the rhythm of his heartbeat. From then on, the Duchess became a regular at the theater.
Adieu, Dea. Si j'avais été riche et noble comme toi, on nous aurait laissé nous aimer. Les princes, les princesses, les duchesses aiment aller s'encanailler chez les pauvres. Mais qu'un seul d'entre eux ose aimer au-dessus de sa condition. Et les coups de bâton pleuvent. C'est de l'enfer des pauvres qu'est fait le paradis des riches.
Gwynplaine bowed in gratitude, especially to the Duchess, who applauded him. After the performance, he entered her carriage again. This time he did not hide, revealing his torn smile. The Duchess whispered, "Do you want what you desire? I will take you to the palace, introduce you to the Queen. You will have wealth. These experiences will only become bad memories." Hearing this, Gwynplaine immediately refused.
Je vous en prie. Ne revenez plus.
For the first time, facing a woman of such beauty and power, he felt he could choose his own fate. Meanwhile, a man approached Dea. "Where is Gwynplaine?" Dea pleaded with him not to harm Gwynplaine. Just then, Ursus rushed back. The man threatened Dea, demanding she hand over Gwynplaine. Ursus angrily declared, "Gwynplaine hates you. He will never be with you." But the man, accompanied by several men in black, sneaked into the backyard. Before Gwynplaine could cry out, he was silenced. Fortunately, his circus companions discovered him. In the chaos, Gwynplaine was saved. The slaver was finally arrested by the police. As he was dragged away, the corners of his mouth still bore that chilling, grotesque grin. Ursus decided to leave London immediately, to escape this place of trouble. But just as they were packing, a group of soldiers arrived. By order of Her Majesty the Queen, they had come to take Gwynplaine. Under torture, the slaver finally confessed his crimes. Just then, Gwynplaine's father's steward appeared. He revealed that Gwynplaine's father had opposed the king, so the king kidnapped Gwynplaine to force his father's submission. But Gwynplaine's father still refused to yield. In retaliation, the king sold the young Gwynplaine to slavers. It turned out Gwynplaine was the sole heir to a marquis. In his final moments, the slaver confessed his sins in a low voice. Ursus searched everywhere for news of Gwynplaine, only to be told by officials that Gwynplaine was dead. Heartbroken, he regretted ever bringing Gwynplaine to this place. Meanwhile, the queen announced Gwynplaine was the sole heir to the marquis. Wealth, power, and land. Everything now belonged to him overnight. The castle was so vast he couldn't find the exit, and the loyal steward waited at his beck and call every day. Not only did he inherit immense wealth, but he also became a member of parliament, with the power to change laws. That very evening, the queen was to formally bestow his title. Dea, devastated by the news of Gwynplaine's death, was consumed by grief. She told Ursus she would find Gwynplaine, no matter where his body lay. Suddenly, several policemen appeared before them. They said Gwynplaine wanted to invite them to a banquet. Hearing he was still alive, the two finally felt relief. For the banquet, Gwynplaine prepared meticulously. Makeup, hair, and a beautiful suit, everything was perfect. The servants presented portraits of Gwynplaine's parents before him. In the paintings, he saw the sadness in his mother's eyes and the sternness of his father. Then he saw the final portrait. The steward said it was Gwynplaine as a child. Gwynplaine touched the boy's lips in the painting, a smile he had never truly possessed. Just before the grand banquet, the queen was detained at the palace due to state affairs and could not attend. When Gwynplaine entered the hall, the crowd froze. The terrible scar was starkly visible under the lights. The nobles whispered among themselves. At that moment, Gwynplaine spotted Ursus and Dea in the crowd. Excited, he told them he was now a count.
Reviens avec nous. Ne reste pas ici avec ces gens. Ils font semblant de te respecter.
Tu te trompes. Ils sont juste suffisamment éduqués pour accepter ma figure telle qu'elle est.
Mais c'est toi qui es aveugle. Ils sont suffisamment éduqués pour cacher ce qu'ils ressentent, mais au fond d'eux, ils sont aussi grossiers que le public du champ de foire, et bien plus malveillants.
Just then, the Duchess signaled him to continue with the ceremony. Gwynplaine raised his glass to toast the distinguished guests. In his eyes, these educated nobles would never mock his appearance like the poor did. But as he tried to drink, his deformed mouth made it impossible to sip the wine. The room erupted in stifled laughter. The nobles, who had pretended to be friendly, could no longer hide their contempt for Gwynplaine. The Duchess gently wiped his mouth clean. The whispering crowd suddenly fell silent. The humiliation was effortlessly dissolved by the Duchess. Gwynplaine's eyes were filled with gratitude for the Countess. He had never met a woman so bold yet graceful, someone who could effortlessly shatter every prejudice. But he failed to notice Dea, heartbroken, slipping away from the crowd. The music began to play, and the two danced intimately to the melody. Gwynplaine had never imagined that one day he would dance at such a dazzling banquet with a woman so beautiful and noble. In her eyes, he was a normal man, not a monster. The loneliness and fear of abandonment he had once felt seemed to dissolve entirely in that dance. Unable to wait, they left the guests behind and retreated to the bedroom. The Duchess was passionate and unrestrained. In that moment, Gwynplaine forgot Dea's tenderness and completely surrendered to the Duchess's embrace. But the steward deliberately led Dea into the bedroom to say goodbye to Gwynplaine. Dea groped her way forward and overheard Gwynplaine's confession to the Duchess. The pain that surged in her heart made it almost impossible to breathe. She turned abruptly and stumbled away, unable to stop, desperate to escape the suffocating space. She wandered into a dimly lit boiler room. Several rough workers, seeing her beauty, tore off her cloak. She tried to escape but was powerless to resist. The workers surrounded her with contempt and malice. Just as she was on the verge of despair, Ursus suddenly appeared. The workers dared not approach Dea again. Ursus supported Dea's trembling body and led her out of the castle. The Duchess emerged from the room. The steward stood rigidly, as if awaiting her instructions. He spoke gently. "Madam, you and the Laughing Man share common interests. I have sent that pure girl away. You can still maintain your current life." The Duchess knew all too well. If the Laughing Man abandoned his noble status, the steward would undoubtedly lose his job as well. To her, the Laughing Man was more like an opponent in a game, but she had never enjoyed it so much. Gwynplaine's repeated rejections only fueled her desire to possess him. She treated love as a tool to control a man's fate. The humiliation of rejection stung her pride like a sword. When Gwynplaine finally surrendered to her, the feeling brought her complete relief. It was as if she had conquered an impregnable fortress. But the thrill of victory, once tasted, lost its novelty. Just then, a servant approached and handed the steward a letter from Dea. The letter read, "On Thursday, Dea and Ursus will leave London. She believes Gwynplaine will find them." It also said Gwynplaine would know of their love and trust for him. When Gwynplaine awoke, he asked the steward where Dea and Ursus were. The steward lied, saying they had already left, and handed Gwynplaine a letter. In it, Dea wrote that Gwynplaine had found his destiny, while she preferred to stay with the circus performers. Their departure was for the best. Clearly, the steward had replaced the original letter. Kind-hearted Gwynplaine did not suspect the steward's deceit. He went to the Duchess, hoping for comfort, but she seemed to have forgotten the tenderness of the previous night. Her eyes were cold, and she barely glanced at him. Yet Gwynplaine still believed the Duchess loved him. He closed his eyes, feeling her kiss, as if searching for proof of her love in every subtle movement. The kiss held no passion, only calculated detachment and fleeting satisfaction. The steward placed a heavy wig and a gilded mask on Gwynplaine. By the Queen's decree, he was to attend a session on the £100,000 appropriation bill. Like his father before him, he stood once more at the podium in Parliament. As soon as he opened his mouth, the nobles, who had expected another extravagant tale of debauchery, were stunned speechless by Gwynplaine's words. This freak from the streets spoke of the searing pain of human suffering, the unemployed, the barren land, children shivering in the cold, everywhere, hunger and poverty. The pampered members of Parliament, accustomed to champagne and jewels, had never seen the slums. Laughter erupted like a tide, and they sneered at him as if he were a joke, casting scornful glances. Gwynplaine raised his hand and tore off the mask, revealing his grotesque face. Within its twisted lines lay unyielding defiance.
Majesté, ce qu'on a fait subir à mon visage, vous-même, vous le faites subir au peuple. Le peuple est mutilé. On lui a déformé le droit, la justice, la vérité, la raison, l'intelligence, comme à moi la bouche. Regardez-moi, Majesté. Le peuple.
The Queen suppressed her fury and turned away, but his indictment did not cease. It cracked open the hypocrisy of Parliament like thunder. The steward, hiding behind a pillar, turned pale and shrank into the shadows, fearing he might be implicated in this reckless outburst.
Un jour, vous ne serez plus les maîtres, plus de prosternement, plus de bassesse, plus d'ignorance, plus de courtisans, plus de valets, plus de rois. Des vivants libres, la lumière.
Retourne à ta chambre foire.
Et vous, retournez à votre opulence, à votre indigestion. Un jour, nous vous mangerons le ventre. Nous vous détripaillerons. Nous vous couperons les attaches du cœur avec nos dents.
Suddenly, the room fell into an eerie silence. The mocking smiles froze on their faces. All arrogance was stunned into submission by this searing, unfiltered sincerity. Gwynplaine said no more. At this moment, the truth struck like a blade, shattering the illusion of grandeur in the room. In his heart, the game of power and conscience had finally ended. Gwynplaine suddenly realized, no matter how fine his clothes or how elevated his status, the kindness in his bones could never blend into the hypocrisy of high society. He tore off his luxurious robes and rushed back to the marketplace, desperate to find Ursus and Dea. But the bustling streets had fallen into an eerie silence, the whispers of the crowd fading like a receding tide. Pushing through the people, he saw Dea curled up on the bed, barely breathing. Ursus was comforting her, telling Dea that Gwynplaine had left them. He didn't want her to suffer so. Dea seemed to hear Gwynplaine's footsteps. She tried to speak the love she had saved her whole life, but death gripped her throat. Gwynplaine lifted her in his arms and carried her to the place where they had shared their first kiss. Only now did he see how foolish he had been. He had believed in the Duchess's hollow, deceitful affection. This betrayal had pierced Dea's heart. It turned out he was the one who had killed the person he loved. He had thought he could cling to the Duchess's love, only to realize he was nothing more than a toy in her hands. Gwynplaine had once dreamed of using his noble title to speak for the poor, but in the end, he was nothing more than a laughingstock in the eyes of the aristocracy. And the most precious treasure of his life, Dea, who saw his soul with her heart, had been destroyed by his own hands. The lake water rose over his chest, then his mouth and nose. He seemed to see Dea smiling at him through the water. Her smile was as pure as the rising sun, making all the world's suffering fade like mist. He closed his eyes and let himself sink into the waves, drifting toward that warm light. This time they had finally broken free from the shackles of the world and reunited in another place, free from suffering. On the shore, the elderly Ursus stood silently, unable to utter a sound. His grief was wrapped in a lifetime of companionship and sudden loss. It was just like the day those two children had stumbled into his life, so full of vitality. Yet now, along with his entire world, they had sunk to the bottom of the icy lake. Gwynplaine, though ugly, had a heart that reached upward. Standing in Parliament, facing the lofty aristocracy, he did not retreat. Instead, he laid bare the suffering of the common people. This courage was more noble than any fine garment. In contrast, the educated aristocrats had long wrapped their souls in exquisite hypocrisy. Hugo once said, "The human heart releases infinite light, and it also creates endless darkness." This story, seemingly about the absurd tale of a laughing man, weaves the darkness of human nature and the harshness of the world into every frame. Even the seemingly kind Gwynplaine was deceived by the Duchess's false warmth. In the end, he could only reunite with his love in another world. More than a glamorous appearance or a hollow title, a sincere and upward-reaching heart is the most precious foundation of life.